come on in, take a seat. Why don't you grab a pen and paper?
Sure.
Okay. And what I'm gonna have you do is write a letter to your son that you're gonna give to him when he turns 18. I want you to write a letter to your daughter.
Okay.
For when she turns 18.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Oh, my son's only 4 years old, so this will be interesting.
Dear Olivia.
Dear Mason,
You won't read this letter for 6 years, and a lot could change between now and then.
Hopefully, you've learned by now that it's important to put on clothes before you go outside.
Maybe you've learned that vegetables are your friends.
I sincerely hope that all of the dabbing has finally stopped.
And also that it's pronounced mac and cheese, not monkey cheese. Mac and cheese.
You dream of becoming a famous singer, so thank you in advance for all the free concert tickets.
Is this still your goal to be a professional YouTuber?
I know you were hoping to become a giraffe when you grew up, but hopefully you have some even better career options now.
It hasn't always been easy. I sat on a piece of gum you left on a chair yesterday and didn't find out until after work.
The dishes really do go in the dishwasher. It's not like a metaphor or something.
Remember when you cut your own hair and then you tried to fix it?
Basically, I didn't sleep for 3 years straight.
But I can tell you this. Despite all the struggles, all the tears, it was completely worth it. And I would do it again, 100 times over for you.
You are a gift and a blessing. You've changed my life.
You are beautiful and strong.
You have so much energy in life, and I can already see how incredibly smart and fearless you are.
More than anything, I want you to know that I love you.
I'm here for you, whatever you need.
You have made me so proud.
And I am excited to see how God uses your life.
You're ready to take on the world. With all my heart.
Love always, Dad.
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 Good morning to everybody. Happy Father's Day to you. We're thankful to have everyone here and thankful to celebrate our dads this morning. I want to say thanks to all the men and their sons who have participated in our worship this morning. It is so cool, so beautiful. Thank you, Thomas and Tyler, for bringing those little ones up here, for Dustin, for bringing your little ones up here, because it's scary to bring your kids up in front of a microphone because you never know what they're going to say. But on admission, I had my eyes open during those last two prayers when Thomas and Tyler were praying, and I was watching them just try and wrangle their kids and stay focused on praying at the same time, and it was such a beautiful image. Thomas was holding Tatum, and she was just fully extended back like that, and she just had so much trust that I'm going to wiggle and I'm going to go lifeless and limp, and my dad's just going to hold on to me. And he did. He was just gripping so tight to her, and he stayed so focused. And I thought, what an awesome illustration that is in of itself of how we relate to our fathers. There's so much trust. There's so much, just as long as I'm in my Father's arms, I'm safe. And the Bible is rich with imagery that models the exact same thing. It's interesting that of all of the things that God could choose to be described by, and there's a lot of things, there's a lot of different images that we see God being described with, but one of the most prominent ones all throughout Scripture is that of a father. Of all of the things in the world. And even more interesting is when Jesus is asked by his disciples, they say, Jesus, teach us how to pray. What is it that we say? How do we relate to God? The very first thing that Jesus says, you remember what it is? He says, our Father. Jesus' own advice here, Jesus, as he's teaching his disciples how to pray, when they say, how do we talk to God? He says, when you come to him like a child comes to their father. In full trust, in full understanding that you are my father, you are my daddy, and in you I put all of my hope, all of my trust. In you I receive all of the things that I need, all of the blessings that I need. We serve a God who Scripture says relates to us in the ways that good Father does. And so we are so very thankful for that. Dads are special. This is a day that we choose to honor our dads. We did this for Mother's Day, and it was fun, and so we're going to do it for Father's Day too. So if you remember for Mother's Day, we said that there were certain things that moms just seem to immediately, instinctively say. We called those things mom isms, right? These are the things that you have heard your mom saying your entire life. Well, dads are not left out of this equation because dads have certain things that they say. It just comes with the territory. And so we're going to go through our top 10 dad isms. Jackson mentioned one of them in his prayer this morning. Top 10 things that dads likely have said to you before. Number one, when's the last time you checked that oil? I'm convinced that my dad would go and he would look at my odometer, and he knew when to ask this question, right? He was keeping track on it, but it was just this little sort of passive-aggressive way of saying, I know you haven't been doing it, but when's the last time you did? Dads are obsessed with checking the oil and checking the tread on tires. Number two, do you think that I'm made of money? Who's said that before? Raise your hand if you're a dad in here, you've said that before. Do you think I'm made of money? Also, interchangeably, that could work with money doesn't grow on trees, right? That's the thing that makes your children roll their eyes at you. All right, number three, this is key dad, classic dad. I'm not sleeping. I'm just resting my eyes, right? How many of you have images of your dad on a Sunday morning maybe watching TV or something? He's sitting there and you go to grab that remote and it's because you think he's asleep, and as soon as you do, what does he say? I'm not sleeping. I'm just resting my eyes. Number four, they don't make them like they used to. Right? This would drive me nuts with my dad because older cars were always better cars, all that kind of stuff. Older movies were always better movies, but they don't make them like they used to. Number five, were you raised in a barn? Many of you have heard that. Some of you might have been raised in a barn. I don't know. Were you raised in a barn? Sometimes that's followed by number six. Are you trying to heat and cool the whole neighborhood? So anytime you leave a door open, my dad could have been upstairs and I leave a door open downstairs and he knows it, right? Somehow he is aware of this. He knows it. Are you trying to heat the whole neighborhood? Back when I was your age, everything was tougher, wasn't it? Dads say, back when I was your age. Number eight, this is just an example of a whole genre of dadisms known as the dad joke, all right? There's lots of these things that we could fill, but this is one of the most classic. Kid says, I'm hungry. Dad says, hey, hungry, I'm dad, right? You guys have heard that before. You stub your toe. Maybe you hurt your toe, and dad says, do I need to call the tow truck? Yeah. Come on, guys. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Dad jokes. I'm interested. Today, after service, I want you to come up and tell me your best dad jokes. Number 9, I don't care how it happened, just fix it, right? I don't care how it happened. This is sort of that dad comes in, something's broken, dad comes in, somebody's crying, and dad says, listen, I don't even know, I don't have to know the story. Just fix this, make this better, right? Take care of this before mom finds out. Number 10, top 10 dadisms. And this is one we have all heard before. Listen, don't tell mom. Don't tell mom. One of the most precious memories I have of me and my dad was with this don't tell mom dadism. Dad checked me out of school when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. And he took me fishing to the county lake in Madison County. We went fishing. We skipped school. He made a really big deal about skipping school. And so Dad and I skipped school. And the whole day he kept saying, don't tell your mom. Don't tell your mom you didn't go to school. Now, I'm convinced that my mom actually knew. I think she was in on it. But there was something about just knowing that I've got a little secret with my dad. My dad checks me out of school so that we can go fishing. It is the most precious memory. Fathers are so very important. Fathers are so very important. Fathers are so very influential in the lives of their children. And I believe that right now, more than ever, this role of being a father, this role of being a dad is more in demand. Maybe we'll expand that and say this role of being a godly father, this role of being a follower of Jesus and a father is more in demand and more needed now so than ever in our history. Because we're living in a world, we're living in a culture that wants to paint fathers as something that I believe that we just weren't intended to be and that so many of us aren't. turn on the TV, and long gone are the days of dad being portrayed as the wise person, or dad being portrayed as the tough man, or just the honorable, the noble man. Like, think of Andy Griffith. Like, that's a TV dad, isn't it? Andy was wise. He was strict. He was stern with Opie when he needed to be. He was an honorable father. He was the kind of father that you could look up to. But if you turn on the TV now, what you see is fathers being portrayed as something completely different. They're one of three things typically on TV and movies. They're either the weak goof, and so they're just sort of the weakling, and they're sort of goofy, they're silly, they're really clumsy, things like this. So they're the weak goof, or they're the disconnected TV watcher. That's sort of this caricature that gets painted of fathers, that they just come home and they're disconnected from their families, and they sit down, they plop down in front of the TV and they eat their dinner, and they don't want anyone to talk to them, and they're disengaged from their children, and they're disengaged from their spouse. And so that's the second caricature that we see of fathers. And then the third one is this sort of what I would call, for lack of a better term, this absent kind of a dirtbag dad. Just an absent person who doesn't want anything to do with their children. They're not in their children's lives. And so these are sort of these images, this stereotypical fathers that we see. And so what I want us to do this morning is to just engage with a little bit of conversation to say, okay, what does a real dad look like? In the church, as followers of Jesus, as Christians, what does it look like to be a father? What does it really look like to be a dad? I can remember when Natalie gave me the news for the first time that she was going to be pregnant, or that she was pregnant, rather. I think we had that conversation too, I'm sure. But I woke up one morning and she just like sprung that news on me before I'd even gotten out of bed. I'm still kind of exhausted, and I'm waking up and I'm trying to think, like, is this a dream? And she's just sort of like gives me this news. And I remember laying in bed, and after we hugged and we cried and all this stuff, and she continued getting ready for work, like, no big deal, right? And I remember laying in bed, and I felt like I cannot move. Like, I cannot get out of this bed, because there's something about hearing this news that you are going to be a father that can be a little startling. There's something about being a father, I believe, that comes with like a weightiness. I'm not talking like a physical weightiness, that comes too, but a weightiness of responsibility that, if we're not careful, can have us just riveted in place. And we can't act and we can't move. And for me, I remember laying there in bed and having all of these fears just cycle through my head. And it was a series of what if things, okay? What if I'm not a good dad? What if I don't have the right words? What if I don't have the right advice? What if I'm not a great model? What if he or she looks at me and they just roll their eyes and they think that I'm such a joke? What if I don't have the type of influence that I'm supposed to have with my children? And sometimes this what if, this fear can set in, and it can cause us to not do the things that we were created and intended to do as fathers. If you have your Bible, turn to Exodus chapter 4. There's a story where Moses is going to get weighed down with a little bit of these what-if fears, in the same way that I think we can find ourselves doing as fathers. So right here, Moses has just encountered the burning bush. And so God has brought this divine plan to Moses to say, you are going to go into Egypt, and you are going to deliver my people. You're going to deliver the Israelite people. And so Moses' job is to go and be a representative to Pharaoh on behalf of God, and give this startling news to Pharaoh that all of these people that are building your kingdom and your empire, you need to let them go because God said so. But he also has to be a voice for the Israelite people. He has to go and convince them to follow him and say, God has come to me, God has spoken to me. And all of these things are really, really heavy for Moses, and he has a hard time. And listen to the what-if things that he says. This is Exodus chapter 4, verse 1. Moses answers, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Can you imagine this? Moses has just encountered the voice of God coming from this burning bush, telling him, giving him very clear instructions, things that we would love to have as Christians. This audible voice just telling me exactly what you want me to do. And Moses has experienced this, and his very first response is to answer with fear and to give this what if. What if they don't listen to me? What if they don't believe me? And so God is going to be extremely patient. We can read on, and what you'll see is that God is going to give Moses a series of signs. He says, throw down your staff, turns into a snake. He says, okay, pick that thing back up. He says, stick your hand in your cloak. Moses pulls it out, and it's full of leprosy, and God takes that away. And so God's giving him a couple of signs. Basically, God is giving him like a little toolkit to say, okay, when they don't believe you, try these things. Is that better, Moses? Is that okay? Are you good now? And listen to what Moses says after God has given him all of these things. Verse 10, then Moses replies again, pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow to speech and tongue. And so once again, we see Moses making these excuses to say, I don't know if I can do this. So he starts off with the what ifs, right? What if they don't listen to me? What if they don't believe me? And now he's going into some things of, well, what if I'm just not the person for the job? What if I'm not cut out to handle this responsibility? And God is so patient with him, but he seems to be getting a little aggravated. And in verse 11, God says this, the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. In a sense, this is what I see God telling Moses. I'm giving you this job. I'm giving you this responsibility, and it's heavy, and it's weighty, but he says, I'm equipping you also. I've been equipping you here. But this last thing where God says, okay, you're worried about mouths and speeches and all of these things. He says, who even gave people mouths? Who gives people ears to hear? God says, I'm in control of all of this. In essence, I see God saying this, Moses, you have got this because I've got this. Moses, understand that you've got this because I've got this. If you trust in me, if you lean on me, then you've got this. I'm setting you up. I'm propping you up for responsibility, but I'm walking with you every step of the way. And so this morning, this is a message that I hope that our fathers and I hope that our men in our church can understand and hear very loudly, and that is that you have been called to a great responsibility. You have been called to a great responsibility, and typically on Father's Day, sometimes it becomes like a little bit of a beating, a bashing. Lifeway Research did this study where they were looking at church attendance for different holidays. And so the number one holiday was Easter, followed by Christmas, followed by Mother's Day, third highest attendance holiday in churches. The very least attended holiday is Father's Day. Father's Day, it even surpasses some of those traveling holidays like Memorial Day and Labor Day, some of these things. And so what these researchers said is they began to ask these questions of these people that they were engaging with in the study. Why is it that Father's Day tends to be the least attended day? And the response that they got back over and over and over from men, from fathers, was, we're not particularly interested in coming to church on a day where we're abashed for the things that we're not. On a day where we're abashed for the faults and the flaws that we have as men of God. And so this morning, what I hope is that our time engaging in this idea of what it looks like to be a Christian father is not a time where we're bashing our fathers, but simply a time where we're saying, men, you have got this. You've got this. You guys are so good. You are doing such a good job raising your children, but we want you to understand the intense responsibility that you have as fathers. But we also want you to understand that, as Brother Coram said so very well around the table, we understand that there are no perfect fathers. But what makes a perfect father in my eyes is a father who is following the Lord. And so you have got this because he has got this. Got your Bibles, go ahead and open up. We're going to look at, we're going to be starting off in Exodus chapter 20. So just flip on over there. I want us to talk about three things that fathers are this morning. Three things that we see fathers being. So the very first thing that we see fathers being is this influential role of being a difference maker. The influences that fathers have over their children is absolutely unreal. The trends, and we'll talk about some of these numbers in a second, but the way that children tend to do the things, the way that children tend to behave the way, follow the patterns of their father is unreal and well documented. But it's no secret that our children are watching us. Our children are watching us. And so I want to tell you guys this story. There's one thing that every single parent, there's one thing that every father, I would say, dreads hearing. There's one phrase. And before I tell you that phrase, I want to tell you kind of the story that leads up to this phrase. And so several months ago, there was something that Bo continued to say over and over and over. And he would just pop out with this little phrase, this word, and he would say this word, and at first, I'll tell you what the word is. I won't say the word. It's not a bad word, but it's definitely not appropriate. Like, you could say this word, but you could keep your PG rating if you were a movie. But we're not going to say it because there's children here. But somehow he had heard this word that rhymes with strap. You got me? Starts with a C, rhymes with strap. We're keeping our PG rating, but also not the thing you want your child to be saying over and over and over. And so at first we hear this and we think, okay, he's still learning how to talk. Sometimes what he's trying to say sounds like something he shouldn't say. And so we're listening really, really intently and we're trying to figure out, is he really saying that? Or we just think that he's saying that? He's definitely saying that, okay? So he's definitely saying this word, and he's even using it like contextually, like in the right sentences sometimes. And so we're like, okay, he's saying something he shouldn't say. Now we've got to step in. And Natalie was so good at this. And so we're in the living room, and something happens. He says this word, and then he immediately looks at us, like to see, is this okay that I just said this word? And Natalie was so great because she just immediately got stern, and she got down there and she begins to explain, this is not a good thing to say. This is not something that we say in this house. This isn't a nice word. This is an ugly word. And he just starts to well up with tears, right? And she's doing a great job at playing bad cop. And I'm trying my best to support her as a father and be the bad cop as well. And so I'm sitting on the couch with my arms folded like, yeah, you listen to your mom. I need to say those things. And he's, lip pokes out, and he's really playing it well, and I stay firm, and I'm looking at him just shaking my head, giving the best judgmental look that I could possibly give, when truly it was kind of cute. Like, the whole thing was cute, right? But Natalie is doing so good, and she's letting him have it, and then she asks this question. She says, where did you hear that word? And this is the phrase that no parent wants to hear, because he looks at her with his lip out and with these tears, and he says, Daddy say that. And I'm sitting on the couch like this, and they both look at me. And I said, are you sure? And he says, yeah, Daddy say that. I don't know where I said it. I don't know when I said it. It might have been in traffic. I have no idea. But it was that moment where I had this realization. I'm living with a little parrot. I'm living with someone who is mimicking not only my speech, but my actions. As a father, you've seen this. I see it all the time. He comes in wearing my shoes. He comes in wearing my shoes. He comes in wearing my hat. He'll say, look at me, I'm Daddy, and he does all of these things, and it's so sweet. But I also have some of those same Moses moments where I see this little boy mimicking the things that I do. I see this little boy repeating the things that I say, and I understand at all times this child is watching me, trying to figure out what it looks like to be a man. At all times, my daughter will be looking at me trying to figure out what a man of God looks like. That's a scary thought, isn't it? Our children are watching us. I want to read some of these numbers to you. This is data that was collected by the Promise Keepers organization and the Baptist Press organization. These numbers say this: if a father does not go to church, even if his wife does, only one child in 50 will become a regular worshiper. So if a father is fully disengaged with church, even if the mother goes and takes those children every Sunday, this is a scary number, is it not? That the studies show, the research shows that only 1 out of 50 of those children will become a regular worshiper. If a father does go regularly to church, regardless of what the mother does, between 2/3 and 3/4 of their children will attend church as an adult. If the father attends church irregularly, between half to 2/3 of those kids will attend church with some regularity as adults. And so this is not to diminish the role of mothers, but this is just to give perspective of how important this idea of fatherhood as Christian men is. Our children are watching our faith. Our children are paying attention. They are clued in to our faith. And what these numbers show is this, that the trends, the decisions that they make later in life are affected by the decisions that we are making today. It continues, if a mother does not go to church, but a father does, minimum of 2/3 go. Another survey found that if a child is the first person in a household to become a Christian, there's a 3.5% probability that everyone else in the household will follow. So what that says is this: mom and dad are not followers of Jesus, but a child, maybe they go to a church camp, something like that, they become a Christian, there's a 3.5% chance that everyone else in that house is going to follow suit. It continues. If the mother is the first person to become a Christian, so if mom decides to become a follower of Jesus, if mom comes home one Sunday and mom has been baptized, now there's a 17% chance that everyone else in that house is going to follow suit and begin following Jesus. But now get this last number. If the father is the first person in the household to become a Christian, there's a 93% chance that everyone else in that household will follow Christ. Do you see that vast difference? A 93% chance, all because there is a father in the household who is showing and modeling what it looks like to make a decision to follow Jesus. The point of these numbers is not to push church attendance, anything like that. The point of these numbers is to show how very necessary our fathers are and to show the startling reality of the influence that we have as men of God over our households. It is no secret that our children are watching our faith. They're learning faith by watching us. But I think it's important to understand that our children are watching our faith for a reason. This is by design. This is intention. Our children are watching our faith because they're created, they are designed by God in His plan, I believe, to imitate our faith. They do the things we do because they're supposed to do the things we do. You've got your Bibles open there to Exodus chapter 20. This is the 10 Commandments. And so Moses has come down and he's got these commands, and this is going to be sort of the first regulations that this community in Israel has. This is the first written laws, code that God has given them to show them how to live as a people. And so the first couple commandments that we have are all about relating to God. This is a personal interaction with God. Sort of this back half is all about how man relates to man, how Israel is supposed to relate to one another in community. And the very first thing that he says, verse 12, is this: honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So the very first commandment that God gives as He's talking about how to interact with other people is this. He says to children. How cool is that? That in God's commandment, He has written something in there for children. He says, children, listen to mom and dad. Pay attention to your father. This is something that's going to help you prosper. This is something that will help you live long. Listen to the things they are telling you. Follow the things that they are teaching you. You can flip over to Ephesians Chapter 6. This is the letter that we've been engaging with throughout this summer. This letter where Paul is giving all of this detail about the identity of the church. And we'll get to some of this in a few weeks. But in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, Paul is going to reiterate this commandment from Exodus chapter 20. He says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth. And so in the Old Testament, we see this command to say, listen, pay attention to mom and dad. Pay attention to your parents. In the New Testament, as the church is sort of understanding how to operate, Paul brings the same thing back into play. And as this letter's being circulated to churches, there's now written something in there for the kids. Perk up, kids, listen. As they're reading this letter, trying to understand how to operate as the new community of God, it says, once again, mom and dad are important. Listen to them. Obey them. Pay attention. Lastly, in the book of Proverbs, even in the wisdom literature in the Bible, we see this beautiful thing. Proverbs starts off in chapter 1, verse 8, as we see Solomon sort of giving this advice here. He says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland of grace around your head and a chain to adore your neck. The instruction of a father is to be listened to. The instruction of a father is to be paid attention to. It is like a garland around your head and a beautiful chain around your neck. It is beautiful. Do you see what God is doing through all this? God is setting us up as fathers. God is setting us up as parents to have an influence that makes a difference. This 93% number that we see, this research is done to say when dad is a follower of Jesus, 93% of the household follows suit. This is by design. This is God's intention. He's even sort of helping us out by giving commandments to the children to say, listen to them. This is a big responsibility for me, is it not? As God sort of takes a light and shines it right on me and says, okay, Adam, I've commanded your children to pay attention to you. I've commanded your children to watch you. I've commanded your children to follow suit after you. Well, that puts a lot of pressure on me, does it not? May we not cave like Moses. May we not be riddled with fear of what if. And we accept this responsibility to say, my children are watching. There's eventually this shift, and sometimes I'll shift back into just being absolutely terrified that Bo says things like, Daddy says that, or Daddy does that. But sometimes there's a moment where I see the beauty in it. And I look at that little boy, and I look at this little girl, and I say, you know what? There's no one's hands I'd rather have it in than mine. This is sort of that, if you are familiar with sports like that, give me the ball, coach. Like, I want this responsibility in my hands because there is no one I care about more on the earth. Put the responsibility on me. I've got this. I've got this not because I am great, not because I am perfect, but I've got this because he has got this. And we'll get to that in a moment, how we lean on him to help us deal with this responsibility. But first, we understand that as parents, as fathers, we are difference makers in the lives of our children. We are also faithful guides. There's a few things that Scripture tells us that we're to engage in with our children. One of the first things that first ways I see us as parents kind of being these faithful guides, helping our children, sort of putting your hand on their back and just guiding them in the way that they're supposed to go. The first way is this, in being consistent in telling the story of God. Being consistent in telling the story and being consistent in telling a story that gives identity to our children. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Again, Israel is just now learning how to relate with the laws of God, and God is helping them form a community that looks like him, form a community that is supposed to reflect him to the rest of the world. Listen to the instruction that we see for parents. This is after this famous line in Jewish religious faith called the Shema, where it's this identifying sort of proclamation of who God is. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength." So we have this command, we have this reminder that we serve one God and one God only, and we love him with everything that we've got. And then in verse 6 it says this, "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates." What this law is saying right here is this. Understand that every waking moment, you should be retelling the story of God over and over and over to your children. We have a responsibility to instill in them their identity as children of God. We have a responsibility to remind them that they are living as a part of a story where God has redeemed his children and called them back to himself. And what the law says is this: when you lie down, when they go to bed, may you be telling them stories about who they are. And when they wake up, may you remind them of who they are as followers of the one true God. He says, may everything, like may your physical self, write it on your hands, write it on your forehead, so that when they look at you, because they're watching you, they see the story of Scripture. Write it across your house, put it on your door frames, put it on the gate when you walk into your house, so that everything in your house, so that everything in your being, everything in your person is consistently telling the story to your children of who they are in light of who he is. So our first job, our first heavy, weighty responsibility as fathers and as parents is to be consistent in telling the story to our children. The next is this: to be diligent in instructing them. So we've given them identity. We've given them a story to tell them this is the story that you're living into. And then now right after, in Ephesians chapter 6, right after the thing that we read where Paul he reminds about this commandment to obey your father and mother, then he's going to give a word to fathers. He says this, fathers, verse 4, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in training and instruction for the Lord. Bring them up in training and instruction for the Lord. My job is not just to tell them the story. My job is to not just say who they are, but my job is also to teach them how to be who they are. I was listening to a podcast this week, and they were talking about training camp for UFC fighters. So these guys go in, these mixed martial art guys, and they go through a training camp for several months before they engage in a fight. And it was talking about the repetition that they go through in this training camp, where if someone counters with comes at me with this move, then I counter with this. And it's sort of the idea of training camp is for everything to become this second nature. Like when you move this way, I know how to move this way. And I don't even have to think about it because I've walked through it so many times. I believe that as parents, as fathers, we have a handful of years that are so very important for us. This is training camp for us with our kids. We tell them who they are, but we also have to show them how to be who they are. We train them up. We give them instructions. We teach them how to live. We remind them of these commandments. We keep them in check. We discipline them when they step out of line. We discipline with love. The Bible is filled with things that talk about the way that a father should be disciplining their child. And so we're consistent in telling them the story. We're diligent in giving them instruction. And then I think the last thing, and perhaps one of the most important ones, is found in Joshua chapter 24. We're determined in the direction that we're going with our family. Turn to Joshua. Joshua chapter 24. You see this famous line that we know from Joshua, but this is sort of coming at the end of Joshua's time of serving as this leader in Israel. And Israel's history is just riddled with people who have chosen to serve, either try and serve God as well as a couple of other pagan gods, or just going back and forth from all of these things. And listen to the way that Joshua addresses this. Verse 14, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. You see, we can go through this and we can tell them the story. And we can show them how to live as a part of this story. But there's something that I believe we're called to do as fathers. I believe we're called to do as parents, and that is to draw the line and say, this is who we are. As a member of this household, we are followers of Jesus Christ. Every family, every community will have things that they rally around. For us, for this family, we rally around Jesus Christ and nothing else. We are determined in setting a direction for our family and saying, this is the way that we are going. And you as my child, you as my daughter, you as my son, I expect you to follow. I've said this before, but in the world that we live in, it seems so prevalent that you see people say, you know what, I want them to make their own decisions. I want them to come to faith on their own. I want them to explore their faith and to come to it. And if they come across it, then great, that's what I'm hoping for. Church, it is too important to leave it up to chance. And there's too many people that are trying to pull our children every which way for us to leave it up to them to decide. We have an opportunity. We've been given an influence, I believe, by the design of God. And we use that influence to say, you are my son, you are my daughter, and we are followers of Jesus. Set the direction. Your families will follow. The last thing that we see fathers being, I believe, is humble followers. And so Joshua sets this clear direction. He says, this is the way that we're going to go. But here's what scares me so much sometimes as a father. What if I set the wrong direction? What if I set the wrong direction? What if I lead my family in a way that is a way that maybe they don't need to go? What if I'm no good at this? What if I'm no good at sort of creating that line to say, this is the way that we're going. This is the way that we're marching. This is the way that we're moving. What if I set the wrong line? I want to leave you with one last thing from Scripture this morning. This comes from Ephesians Chapter 2. And there's an image that we see Paul using in Ephesians chapter 2 that I believe gives me peace of mind and lifts some of this anxiety that I get about the responsibility I have as a father. So Paul is going to go into detail, and he's going to talk about these two groups of people who are coming together. The church in its infancy was a radical thing because you have this people who have for a long time been this covenant community of faith. This is God's elect. These are God's chosen people in Israel. And they've had this sense of identity of being God's chosen people. But what Paul is so clear about is saying that through Christ, everyone is now invited into the family of God. And this includes the Gentiles. And so there's a dynamic of racism really that's going on here as the Jewish people have looked at the Gentile people as heathens for a long time. And as the Gentile people have looked with a little bit of like disdain at the Jewish people for their sense of identity. And now these two groups of people are coming together. And Paul is trying to instruct them how to live together and how to see one another as equal through Christ. And so there's this beauty in the church, but there is a lot of difficulty in the church. And for most of the back half of chapter 2 that we see here is Paul trying to teach these two how to reconcile their differences and how to come together on the things that they have in unity. But as I read through that, I think, man, this is a lot to handle. If I were one of these church leaders in the early church and I've got the Gentile people and I've got the Jewish people and they're all coming together, I would have this sense of, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to lead these people. I don't know how I'm supposed to handle all of this. My arms are only so big. I can only carry and juggle so much. And then Paul gives this imagery. Verse 19, chapter 2 of Ephesians. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household. Get this, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. In him, the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him, you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. Paul says, this church is being built on a foundation with Christ as the chief cornerstone. I've read this before and I've heard this and I've always had these ideas maybe of what the cornerstone is intended to do. And for me, most of the time, it's had just one purpose, one function. This is what a cornerstone would have looked like. This is a group of guys who have went to where Nazareth would have been, and they actually build houses that would have looked like, the houses that Jesus lived in and things. And this is a cornerstone. They would find the biggest stone that they could find. They would find the heaviest stone, and then they would sort of work this thing until it had some smooth edges and some defined corners. And they would place this at the very corner, the edge of the foundation. And one thing that this cornerstone does is it supports a lot of weight, right? The house is going to be built up on this thing, and it's going to handle, it's going to support all of that weight. And so I love this imagery that Paul gives us where he says, listen, Christ is your support. When you feel like the weight of being a father, when you feel like the weight of being a parent, when you feel like the weight of being a Christian is too much to bear, may you lean on Christ because he is heavy enough to support it. He's heavy enough to hold you up when you feel too weak to stand. And so I love this imagery of Christ supporting us. But there's something that as I sort of dig a little bit deeper into this ancient architecture that you see, the cornerstone had an even more important function, and that was to set the course for the rest of the foundation. The main job of the cornerstone is to make sure that the house is square. They would put this thing and they would define off the corners and the edges, and that would create a line. And every other block, every other brick would fall in line with that cornerstone. It's the thing that dictates the line that this is supposed to go and the way this is supposed to go. And so if the cornerstone is a little bit wonky, then the lines are going to be a little bit wonky and the house isn't going to be able to stand. Do you see the image that Paul is giving now of Christ being the chief cornerstone of the church? Christ is the one giving our direction. Christ is the one showing us the line in which we may go. And so here's the last thing, and we'll end on this. As fathers this morning, as parents, but as fathers, as we're dealing with dads and this responsibility that we have, as we get overwhelmed, as we get weighted down with this responsibility, and it's a great one. It's a big one. And as we ask these questions, I don't know how to go, I don't know where to lead, then if I could give you this image right here. So when I think about leading my family, say these are my kids. I could be going backwards, and I could be pulling them, and I could be trying to figure out where to go, or I could have my eyes fixed this way, and I could grab them by the hand and say, this is the way we're going. What is it as a father, or who is it as a father that you are following. To be a father, to be a Christian father, means that I am a humble follower of Jesus. If I'm going to lead my family well, then I have to follow the lines that he's given. Christ is the chief cornerstone of the church. I believe Christ is the chief cornerstone of our families. He is the support that holds us up, and he is the guiding force that gives us directions. Fathers, you've got this. You do. You really do. God has called you to an enormous task, but he has not left you to do it alone. Keep your eyes on Christ. When you start to have those moments of doubt, when you start to have those fears, when those what-ifs begin to creep in, may you push those aside and say, I am following Jesus. When you start to have those times where you feel like the wheels are coming off with our family, and which way are we going? How do I hold this thing together? How do I juggle all of this? Keep your eyes on Jesus. He will lead us. He will show us. He is our cornerstone. He is our rock. If I am to be a good father, if I am to be a godly father, I can never take my eyes off of Jesus. I'm convinced of this. Our children might love for us to be very successful people at work. Our children might love for us to be the funniest dad. Our children might love for us to be the coolest dad, or to drive the coolest car, or all of these things. Our children might love for us to be the funnest dad who just comes home and spends all of the things that our children desire for us to be. They may desire for us to be those things. What our children need for us to be is men of God. What our children need for us to be is men who have our eyes fixed on Jesus, and we are never looking away. This morning, fathers, I hope that you are encouraged. And I hope that these words are ringing through your ear. You've got this because he's got this. This morning, if there's anything that the church can do for you, if any needs you have, if there's anybody who would like to make the decision to become a follower of Jesus, we ask that you please come forward as we stand together and as we sing.